Now that we've seen how three worlds collided during the Age of Exploration, we are going to look into the settlement patterns based on the motivations of the early colonial period.
As we focus primarily on European and specifically English settlement, we will look at the characteristics of early exploration and settlements in the New World as they pertain to England. Early settlers established the New England colonies. They were settled by Puritans, often seeking freedom from religious persecution over in Europe. They formed what was called a covenant community. That is, a community based on agreement between themselves and a way to live with their God. They based their principles through the Mayflower Compact, not just their religious beliefs, how they wanted to govern as well as interact with one another. These Puritans were often intolerant of anyone who did not care to share their religious beliefs. While they were seeking a place of freedom, they did not see themselves as being in a position where they needed to offer that freedom to anyone else. But don't forget, they were also looking for economic opportunity, something they were denied over in Europe, in England, and in Northern Europe. They could not get this, and so the New World seemed to be their best opportunity to get ahead when it came to finances. And keep in mind, when they settled in family groups. Unlike the Spanish, who came as conquistadors, unlike the French, who settled as individual traders, these guys came over in family groups. They were here to stay and try to make a better life for themselves. The Puritans practiced a form of direct democracy through what we call town meetings. This direct democracy meant everybody participated equally as long as they were men owning property and good-standing members of the church. Dissenters, those who did not agree with the Puritan ethics, left and formed their own colonies, such as Rhode Island and later Connecticut. The middle colonies were settled by people also seeking religious freedom, as well as those trying to find economic opportunity. The Quakers settled here, and they tended to be much more tolerant of other religions and other people than the Puritans were. There was such a variety of types of people who came to the middle colonies that the best way to get along was to tolerate, understand, and accept. Jamestown was established in 1607 by the Virginia Company of London. This was a business venture by a joint stock company. The sole purpose of the founding of Jamestown was to make a profit. It was the first permanent English settlement in the New World. Again, going back to 1607. They initially thought they were going to find gold, trying to make a profit. However, when their efforts in gold failed, tobacco became their version of gold. A strain established by John Rolfe proved to make the largest profit. And as tobacco exports back to England increased, so did the colony's profits, virtually going from rags to riches. In Virginia, they established the Virginia House of Burgesses. This was the first elected assembly anywhere in the New World. That is to say, members of the colony chose legislators to meet at the Virginia House of Burgesses to decide on matters for the entire colony. This has operated continuously since the 1600s. Today it's known as the General Assembly of Virginia. Again, these guys came seeking economic opportunity, not just in Jamestown and Virginia, but also the Carolinas, Maryland, and Georgia. The Cavaliers were members of the English nobility. They were going to receive large land grants from the King of England on which to settle and establish large plantation-style commerce. Poor English immigrants also came seeking better lives. While the Cavaliers settled in the best coastal lowlands, the poor English tended to settle further west, up in the Piedmont area, the foothills, and in the Appalachian Mountains in the Shenandoah Valley. While their farms were smaller and the soil not quite so good, they too were seeking a better life for themselves. As tobacco became more important, so did the need to bring in some cheap labor. Indentured servants served two very important ends. They would populate the colony, that is, bring more people over, as well as provide a cheap source of labor. What is an indentured servant? These are people from Europe who wanted to come to the New World but couldn't afford it. They would agree to work on a plantation for 3, 5, maybe 7 years, then earn their freedom, earn a parcel of land which they could call their own, and live as free land owners. A far better lot than they would have back in Mother England. It wasn't long, 1619 to be exact, before the first African slaves began to arrive. This came primarily because Virginia in the South developed an agricultural economy based on cash crops, and the need for large, cheap labor surpassed the indentured servants and came to rely on the first African slaves. As I mentioned, these were dominant in the southern colonies as well as the Caribbean, and the first Africans arrived in Jamestown in 1619. It started off as one ship from Portugal, but later on became an intentional trade. Colonization also led to ideas of representative government and religious toleration, which started in the Americas and later spread to many parts of the rest of the world. The redistribution of the world's population, by choice or by force, is going to initiate a global change that will continue until this time. In our next segment, we're going to look at how the English colonies developed and how they began to see themselves more as American rather than European.